World War II changed the rules of warfare forever, and when German panzer divisions rolled across Europe with unstoppable momentum, the United States Army faced a terrifying problem. How do you stop a heavily armored tank that can punch through your lines like tissue paper? The answer most people expected was simple: build bigger tanks, thicker armor, more powerful guns, but one man had a different idea. His name was Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Davis Bruce, and his vision would create one of the most controversial and successful vehicles of the war. The M18 Hellcat, a tank destroyer that threw conventional wisdom out the window and said one thing: speed is the armor. In 1941, the world watched in horror as Germany's blitzkrieg tactics destroyed Poland in weeks and crushed France in 40 days. Massive columns of panzers supported by aircraft and motorized infantry moved faster than anyone thought possible. They punched through defensive lines, encircled entire armies, and left traditional military doctrine in ruins. The United States wasn't even in the war yet, but military planners were paying attention, and they were terrified. The German panzer wasn't just a weapon, it was a philosophy: speed, shock, overwhelming force concentrated at a single point, and the U.S. Army had nothing that could stop it. Lieutenant Colonel Bruce took command of the Tank Destroyer Tactical and Firing Center at Fort Meade, Maryland on November 27, 1941, just 10 days before Pearl Harbor. His mission was to develop a new kind of fighting unit, not tanks designed to support infantry, not slow, heavily armored fortresses. He wanted something fast, something that could outmaneuver enemy armor, strike from unexpected angles, and disappear before the enemy could react. Bruce envisioned a cruiser, not a battleship. His concept was revolutionary. Instead of meeting German panzers head-on in slugfests that favored whoever had the thickest armor, American tank destroyers would use speed and tactical flexibility. They'd wait in reserve, rush to wherever the enemy concentrated their attack, strike the flanks and rear of enemy formations, and then relocate before German gunners could swing their turrets around, hit and run, seek, strike, destroy. But there was a problem. The U.S. Army didn't have a vehicle that could do this. Early attempts were improvised disasters. The M3 was a half-track with a 75mm gun bolted onto the back. The M6 was literally a Dodge pickup truck with a 37mm gun mounted in the bed. These weren't tank destroyers. They were desperate experiments. And in North Africa, they proved woefully inadequate. German panzers tore them apart. The M10 Wolverine came next. Built on the chassis of the M4 Sherman tank, it was reliable and had a decent 3-inch gun. But Bruce hated it. Too heavy, too slow, top speed, barely 30 miles per hour. It was just a Sherman with an open turret and slightly better firepower. That wasn't the game changer he needed. So Bruce went back to the drawing board, and this time he made a decision that would define the M18. He was willing to sacrifice armor. Almost all of it. In December 1941, the Ordnance Corps issued requirements for a new tank destroyer. It needed a powerful engine, lightweight construction, and Christie suspension for speed. The first prototype mounted a tiny 37mm gun. Completely useless, they upgraded to a British 57mm. Still not enough. Then a 75mm, better, but not good enough. Finally, in 1943, they mounted a high-velocity 76mm gun on a prototype called the T-70, and everything clicked. Buick's engineers, led by the legendary designer Harley Earl, created something extraordinary. The M18 weighed just under 20 tons, almost 12 tons lighter than a Sherman. Its armor was laughably thin. The thickest point, the gun shield, was only 1 inch thick. The sides and rear were barely half an inch. A .30 caliber armor-piercing round could penetrate the turret side at 75 yards. This wasn't a tank. It was barely more protected than an armored car, but that weight savings went somewhere. Under the rear deck sat a Wright Continental R975 radial engine, the same one used in Sherman tanks and even some aircraft. 9 cylinders, supercharged, 400 horsepower, 940 pound-feet of torque. Paired with an innovative Torquematic 3-speed automatic transmission, this power plant gave the M18 something no other tracked armored vehicle in World War II could match: pure terrifying speed. Official top speed was listed as 55 miles per hour on roads, but crews reported hitting 60 miles per hour in ideal conditions. Some sources claim it could reach nearly 90 kilometers per hour over 55 miles per hour across varied terrain. To put this in perspective, a Sherman tank topped out at 25 miles per hour. The German Tiger I, that fearsome beast with armor 4 inches thick on the front, could barely manage 24 miles per hour. The Panther, Germany's best all-around tank, hit 34 miles per hour on roads, but was much slower cross-country. The M18 Hellcat could outrun them all. It could sprint circles around German armor, and that speed became its survival tool. Buick's publicity department gave it the name Hellcat. The logo showed a black cat biting through tank tracks with the motto, "Seek, Strike, Destroy." Between July 1943 and October 1944, Buick produced 2507 M18 Hellcats. Originally, they planned to build almost 9,000, but production was cut short for complex reasons. Shifting battlefield doctrine, the availability of other tank destroyers like the M36, and questions about whether the tank destroyer force even needed to exist as a separate branch. But the Hellcats that did make it to the battlefield would prove themselves in blood and fire. The M18 first saw combat in Italy in spring 1944. 5 T-70 prototypes were sent to test the design in real combat conditions. 3 went to the 894th Tank Destroyer Battalion. 2 went to the 601st. The 894th used them in their reconnaissance company because of their incredible speed. Crews loved the 76mm gun's hitting power, but they immediately identified the Hellcat's weaknesses. The thin armor made crews nervous. The interior was cramped. Handling ammunition was awkward. And that open-top turret shared with all American tank destroyers left the crew exposed. Snipers, artillery fragments, grenades. In close combat, the Hellcat was vulnerable in ways a closed turret tank wasn't. But the Hellcat truly proved itself in France, September 19, 1944, near the town of Aricourt. This battle would become the stuff of legend. Hitler had ordered a counteroffensive against General George Patton's Third Army. The German 5th Panzer Army, spearheaded by the 113th Panzer Brigade, was going to smash through American lines and push Patton back. The Germans brought their best. Panther tanks. These weren't the outdated Panzer IVs from earlier in the war. Panthers had thick, sloped frontal armor that could bounce shells from almost any Allied gun. They had long-barreled 75mm guns that could kill a Sherman at over a mile away. They were the best tanks Germany had, and they outnumbered the Americans. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18 Hellcats, was attached to Patton's 4th Armored Division. Company C, under Captain Tom Evans, was defending the area around Aricourt. Early morning, thick fog blanketed the battlefield. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper was leading a platoon of 4 Hellcats near the village of Rechicourt-le-Petit. Visibility was terrible. Then, through the fog, Leiper saw it. A German tank gun barrel, 30 feet away. He had seconds to react. Leiper immediately deployed his platoon. The Hellcats spread out, using the fog and terrain for concealment. And then the battle erupted. In the first 5 minutes, Leiper's platoon knocked out 5 German tanks, Panthers, for the loss of 1 M18. The Germans had no idea what hit them. The fog worked both ways. German commanders couldn't see where the American fire was coming from. Hellcat crews used their speed to reposition constantly. Fire a shot. Reverse at full speed. Relocate 50, 100 yards away. Fire again. The Germans would try to return fire, but by the time their slow-traversing turrets swung around, the Hellcat was gone. Sergeant Henry Hartmann's Hellcat became a legend that day. He personally destroyed 6 German tanks. Most were Panthers. Hartmann and his crew used textbook tank destroyer tactics. Stay hidden. Wait for the perfect shot. Aim for the sides and rear where armor was thinnest. Fire. Move. Repeat. By the time the fog lifted, the battlefield told the story. Burning Panthers dotted the landscape. Company C engaged more German tanks as they pressed the attack toward the American command post. Captain Evans used brilliant tactics. 1 platoon of Hellcats acted as bait, drawing German tanks forward. The Germans focused on that platoon, trying to bring their superior frontal armor to bear. but Evans had positioned his other 2 platoons on the flanks. The moment the Panthers committed to attacking the bait, they exposed their vulnerable sides to the hidden Hellcats. It was a slaughter. Over the next 3 days, the Battle of Aricourt raged. When it finally ended, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had destroyed 39 German tanks. Most were Panthers. 4 M18s were destroyed. 3 more were damaged. That's a kill-to-loss ratio of nearly 10-1. American crews were ecstatic. The Hellcat had gone toe-to-toe with Germany's best tank and won decisively, but it wasn't the armor that won. It wasn't even the gun. Though the 76mm was certainly effective, it was the speed, the ability to flank, to reposition, to control the tempo of battle. Speed was the armor. December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last desperate gamble to split the Allied armies and capture the vital port of Antwerp. In one of the largest battles on the Western Front, German armored divisions smashed through thinly held American lines in the Ardennes forest. The weather was terrible. Snow, freezing rain, thick fog, perfect conditions for German armor to move under cover. The 101st Airborne Division was rushed to defend the critical crossroads town of Bastogne. But paratroopers don't have heavy weapons. They needed support. Team de Sobry, a combined arms task force from the 10th Armored Division, was sent north to the village of Noville, just 4 miles from Bastogne. With them went 4 M18 Hellcats from the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion. December 19th and 20. The 2nd Panzer Division attacked Noville. Their objective was to bypass Bastogne, capture key highways, and seize American fuel dumps. The German offensive was already running out of gas. Literally, they desperately needed those fuel depots. Team de Sobry and the 4 Hellcats stood in their way. The fighting was brutal. German tanks and infantry came in waves. The Hellcats used the same tactics that worked at Aricourt: speed, flanking maneuvers, hit and run. When German panzers advanced, the Hellcats sprinted to new positions, fired into their flanks, and disappeared before return fire arrived. The battle was chaos, but the Hellcats were in their element. Over 2 days of intense combat, the 1st Battalion of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment and the 4 M18 Hellcats destroyed at least 30 German tanks. They inflicted between 500 and 1,000 casualties on the attacking German forces. One military historian credited the M18 tank destroyers with 24 kills, including several Tigers. More importantly, the Hellcats' ability to shoot and scoot, appearing and disappearing across the battlefield, confused the German commanders. They couldn't pin down where American armor was concentrated. The attack stalled. Team de Sobry held Noville overnight. The delay gave the 101st Airborne critical time to dig in at Bastogne. The German offensive, already behind schedule, lost momentum, and Team de Sobry's high-speed dash to reach Noville before the Germans arrived is one of the few documented cases where the M18's legendary top speed was actually used exactly as designed, racing down highways at 55 miles per hour to get ahead of an enemy armored column. But the M18 wasn't perfect. Far from it. That paper-thin armor was a constant source of anxiety for crews. Any hit from any angle could penetrate. German 88mm anti-tank guns could punch through an M18 from any range. Even lighter German weapons could disable or destroy a Hellcat if they got a clean shot. The open-top turret meant crew members were exposed to artillery fragments, small arms fire, and grenades. In urban combat or close terrain, that vulnerability was terrifying. Crews had to be smart, aggressive, but never reckless. One mistake meant death, and the 76mm gun, while powerful, had limitations. Against the frontal armor of a Panther or Tiger, it struggled. Standard armor-piercing rounds often bounced off. There was a special high-velocity armor-piercing round, the T4 HVAP, that could penetrate thicker armor. But these rounds were in very short supply. Most crews never saw them. So Hellcat crews learned to be clever. They aimed for weak spots, the junction between the Panther's gun mantlet and glacis plate. If you hit it just right, the shell would ricochet downward into the driver's compartment, killing the crew or disabling the tank. They targeted the sides and rear whenever possible. They used terrain, buildings, and forests to get close before the enemy could react. Historian Stephen Zaloga, one of the foremost experts on American armor, has argued that the M18's design was poorly balanced. He stated that the Hellcat's combat record is attributable to the training and dedication of its crews, not to its design. And there's truth to that. American tank destroyer crews were volunteers. They were well-trained, motivated, and they understood their vehicle's strengths and weaknesses. They knew they couldn't brawl with German heavy tanks, so they didn't. They used speed, surprise, and superior tactics to negate the enemy's advantages, but here's the thing. That was exactly the doctrine the M18 was designed for. Andrew Bruce didn't want his tank destroyers trading shots with panzers in stand-up fights. He wanted them to be ghosts, appear, kill, vanish. And when used correctly, the M18 was devastatingly effective. The 630th Tank Destroyer Battalion destroyed 53 Panthers and Tigers in July 1944 alone. The 603rd and 704th Tank Destroyer Battalions each reported destroying over 90 enemy armored vehicles during the war. The M18 had the best kill-to-loss ratio of any American tank or tank destroyer in World War II. Over 500 enemy armored vehicles destroyed. 217 Hellcats lost in action. That's roughly 2.4 to 1. Now, in fairness, the M18 was rarely used the way it was designed. Tank destroyer doctrine called for mass battalions held in reserve, rushing forward to counter breakthroughs by enemy armor, but that situation almost never happened. The feared German blitzkrieg attacks that inspired the whole concept simply didn't materialize in Western Europe after D-Day. Instead, M18s were parceled out in small groups, attached to infantry divisions, used to clear pillboxes, destroy fortified positions, and provide fire support. They functioned more like assault guns than tank destroyers, and that exposed their weaknesses: the thin armor, the lack of a coaxial machine gun, the open turret. Crews complained constantly about being exposed to small arms fire. The open turret was freezing in the brutal winter of 1944 and 1945. The air-cooled engine pulled air through the crew compartment, turning the vehicle into a rolling refrigerator, and because they were so often used against infantry targets, crews burned through their precious armor-piercing ammunition, wasting it on bunkers and buildings when they might desperately need it against actual tanks. But despite all these issues, the M18 remained popular with its crews. They appreciated the speed, the reliability, the excellent visibility from the open turret, and when they did get the chance to hunt tanks, they knew their vehicle could do the job. After World War II, the M18 was rapidly phased out of U.S. service. The tank destroyer force was disbanded, the entire concept was abandoned. Tanks themselves, like the new M26 Pershing and later the M48 Patton, would take over the anti-tank role, but the M18 had an interesting second life. The M39 Armored Utility Vehicle, a turretless variant, served in the Korean War as a personnel carrier and ammunition hauler, and many countries around the world bought surplus Hellcats. Yugoslavia received 260 and used them through the Cold War and even into the Bosnian conflict of the 1990s. Taiwan, Greece, and Italy all operated M18s for decades. Some were still in service 50 years after they were built. So what's the legacy of the M18 Hellcat? It represents a bold experiment, a radical idea that went against everything conventional wisdom said about armored warfare. Instead of armor, rely on speed. Instead of standing and fighting, hit and run. Instead of matching the enemy's strengths, exploit their weaknesses. German tanks had thick armor and powerful guns, but they were slow. Their turrets traversed slowly. They were mechanically complex and prone to breakdowns. The Hellcat took advantage of all of that. It was faster, more agile, more reliable. And in the hands of smart, well-trained crews, it could dance around the enemy and tear them apart. Was it the perfect tank destroyer? No. The thin armor was a fatal flaw in many combat situations. The 76mm gun wasn't powerful enough to reliably penetrate the frontal armor of late-war German heavy tanks, and the doctrine it was built around proved largely obsolete. But the M18 proved something important. You don't need to be the biggest, heaviest, or most powerful to win. Sometimes the fastest and smartest is enough. In September 1944, when 7 Hellcats faced 200 German tanks at Ericourt and walked away victorious, they proved that speed, when used correctly, really could be the armor. The Hellcat remains the fastest-tracked armored vehicle America fielded in World War II, faster than modern vehicles decades later, and it achieved something remarkable. A kill-to-loss ratio better than any other U.S. tank or tank destroyer of the war. Not because it was invincible, but because its crews understood a fundamental truth. If you can't be hit, armor doesn't matter. And if you're fast enough, you control when, where, and how the battle happens. That's the lesson of the M18 Hellcat. Speed isn't just about going fast, it's about controlling the fight. It's about being where the enemy doesn't expect you, striking before they can react, and disappearing before they can strike back. The Hellcat threw armor out the window and said speed is the armor. And for 2,507 crews who took it into battle, that gamble paid off, because sometimes the fastest wins. Thank you for watching until the end. You can click in these other videos if you like this one. Don't forget to like and subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video. Have a good day.